Hey guys, how's it going? Kevin Clear here with a knife video for you. And today we're taking a look at a knife that really needs no introduction, but I'm gonna give it one anyway. This is the very iconic, very well-known Sebenza 21 from Chris Reeve Knives. And this is a particular version. This is called the Doppler, hence the milling pattern here and the silver thumb studs. Now, really attractive knife. I feel like this is one of the coolest versions, if not the coolest version of this knife. And so I'm going to share this with you, but I want to have you guys make some comments down below about what you think of this knife and whether or not it deserves the lauded place that it has. Right? This is a knife that's kind of often considered the standard bearer, the measuring stick by which all folders should be measured and to which they must all be compared, especially in the world of higher end knives. And you know, I do kind of get it. There's a lot I appreciate about this, the quality, the simplicity, the design that's to be a long-term user, which I really like. Or the engineering, which is to make it a very long-term user, which I do appreciate. But I'd love to hear your comments down below on what you think of all of that and what place the Sebenza has for you, or if you just don't like it at all and you think there are tons of other blades out there. Now, I will say this. If you're going to be the person who says, yeah, the Sebenza sucks, everything else is better, I'd rather you be specific, okay? So if you don't think the Sebenza deserves its place as sort of the standard by which we measure high-end knives and the standard by which we measure quality and fit and finish and all of that, what knife deserves that place? Okay, I'd really like to hear that if you're going to make the argument that this knife is overhyped, overrated, doesn't deserve the place it gets. Well, then what knife does? All right, what knife does it better and is offering more for the money? All right, and that's the other thing we'll get into a little bit is a discussion of value on these because, they're not cheap, okay? No question about it. And that's one of the things I think that holds a lot of people off. People kind of stop at, the zero tolerance, around that $200, $250 mark. And they're like, no way. By the way, ZTs have gone up to 260, which I think changes this discussion a little. The standard Sebenza is going to be 450 these days, and then the small is maybe 425. I'm not sure. Someone can confirm. Okay, so having gotten all that out of the way, let's go ahead and have our discussion about the features and the characteristics of the very well-known Sebenza 21, beginning with the overall size and weight. So this guy is 8 7/16 overall, which is really nice for, which is pretty much right in that sweet spot of size between 8 and 8.5 inches. 3 5/8 on the blade length, 4 13/16 on the overall handle length. Now, the grip area, you can see you lose a little bit here, but the grip area is still quite good at just about 4 inches. All right. And finally, 4.6 ounces is the weight on this. And 4.6 ounces, at least as far as I'm concerned, is quite comfortable to carry. Now, again, let me reiterate that this is the large version of this knife, and there is a small Sebenza for those of you who don't feel like you need to compensate for anything. But to me, yeah, the small makes no sense at all. So let's go ahead and take a look first at the blade, the way that we always do. And the blade is going to be the first place where we see sort of the theme of this knife. All right, this is a knife that's meant to be used, and it's meant to be used for a long time and just continue to deliver performance for the user. All right, S35VN steel, which is a very good steel, hardened to 59 to 60 Rockwell. Now, some have complained about that Rockwell hardness, but of course, the response from Chris Reeve Knives is that they're trying to make it more sharpenable by the end user. All right, and I get that. Very aggressive hollow grind, leaving this very thin behind the edge, which is quite nice, okay? I guess very aggressive is not necessary, but a fairly hefty hollow grind there. So this is a very slicey blade, nice and thin. That does make it a little easier to sharpen, along with this very deep finger choil. And if you look closely at this, let's see if I can show you. Okay, I got the light bouncing just right. So look how far up you're going to go on this blade with sharpening, right? You could keep sharpening for a long time before you start to even get into where the plunge grind starts to thicken up a little bit. So you've got a lot of wear on this knife. All right, and again, I guess we should mention stonewash finish for the same reason. Stonewash just holds wear or wears really nicely. And so we have a really nice blade designed to cut for a long, long time. I do want to make one mention here of the convex grind. So this secondary bevel, that is the very sharpened edge, unlike what you're used to, so most knives have what we call a V grind, where both of these edges are flattened on a sharpened on a flat surface, not flattened on a sharp surface, sharpened on a flat surface. With the Chris Reeve knives, they're done with a convex edge. So instead of being V, they're convex. So there's a little bit of a radius to each of these sides, okay? And what that does is makes the edge more stable, more or less likely to chip, less likely to roll, and more long lasting. All right. Now, some have tried to argue, and yeah, I don't know. I really don't see it. You could maybe try to make the argument that it's not going to be quite as hair popping sharp, but I mean, I've seen some really, really wickedly sharp convex edges, see them regularly. So I don't really think that argument holds up, but I do think there's something to be said for the extra longevity you get. Now, they're a little harder to sharpen, okay? You've got to make a special effort to get that convex edge, and you're going to want to do that by, there are a number of methods. Rob over at the Apostle P channel has a whole video just devoted to sharpening convex edges. For me, I tend to use just a mouse pad with some sandpaper, and that seems to work really, really well. And the other thing I do is make sure I strop my Chris Reeve knives regularly, so I have to sharpen them less often, because it is a little more time consuming and takes a little more care to get the kind of edge you want. Okay, so that's my discussion of the blade and my discussion of that convex edge. And the reason I bring it up is I know people have gotten Chris Reeve knives before and had a hard time sharpening them, and because they're not realizing that when you take this convex edge and put it on your flat stone, you're not actually touching the apex of the edge, right? You've got to cut all this extra material off to make it down into a flat grind, and then you can start dealing with the apex. Okay, so I just wanted to add that little bit in there. For me, all of those characteristics of this blade are good things, and I appreciate all of them. And I like, again, that purposeful, thought out idea of let's make this the most usable knife that we can. And I think they really have achieved that with this particular blade. Now, if you want something a little more robust, you might want to go to the Inkosi, which, by the way, is a knife that I also adore. And I'm really on the fence, guys. I really am about, you guys probably know the story behind this. I think I mentioned it. I sold my Inkosi in order to buy an Insingo Inkosi, and I ended up using the money for this instead. Okay, so I don't know if I'm going to keep this and save up for an Inkosi, or if I'm going to sell this for the Insingo Inkosi. I don't know. All I can tell you, I really, really like this, and I'm really loath to part with it. So we'll see what happens. Okay, moving on to lockup and deployment. Now, this is an area that Chris Reeve is really known for. And I will say this, as I move this blade through its range of motion, it is very impressive. Okay, it's just, I'm trying to be gentle here so I can sort of show you guys, but smooth as silk. And I have, by the way, taken this down, cleaned it up, and it's running KPL rather than the fluorinated grease, and it seems to be working really, really well. I don't know. So if you, by the way, if you want some KPL, send me a message over on Instagram or comment down below. The US distributor, or I mean the Canadian distributor, wow, I don't know why I'm saying that, is DNF Edgeworks, and I will put a link to his Instagram profile down below so you can pick up some KPL from him. I've been pretty happy with it, and I like the price of it. So that's all I'll say about that for now. What I will say is the way this pivot is done is great. So you have phosphor bronze washers, obviously smaller one on the lock side so that, right, the lock doesn't hit it. If you look over, see if I can show you. There you go. So you can see the washer on the non-locking side, or the show side, is a little larger, and that's meant to provide extra stability. And then on the lock side, it's smaller because a washer the same size as the show side would actually run into the lock bar. Okay. Now, having said that, very, very smooth. And here's the nice thing about this, and typical of Chris Reeve knives. Forget this. I'll come back to that part. So I like the phosphor bronze washers. I like the fact that they have openings in them to hold the fluorinated grease or whatever other lubricant. Quit that. There you go. You might be using. Moving on here to the lock bar. Again, the lock bar is meant for usability and longevity. We've got a thicker relief cut here, so they haven't removed as much material as we often see, and I really, really like that. One of my big complaints over lots of titanium frame locks, especially ones that claim to be like hard use, okay, is how much material they've removed from here, leaving just a little sliver of titanium. While we're talking about this, check out the massive stop pin, and if you take this pivot apart, you'll see a very large pivot screw as well. Again, both of those meant to reduce wear, increase longevity. Really, really great attention to making a knife that's going to last a long time. Everything around this is really, really well done in that regard. So yeah, smooth as silk. The thumb stud is not my favorite, okay? Others have said, yeah, the thumb stud could use work, and I don't find it uncomfortable, but I do get the argument that some have made that, yeah, this thumb stud is not the greatest thing ever. Do I have anything that's a really good example? No, I don't. But something like the thumb stud that's on the new Cold Steel 8010 is fantastic. It's just grippy, it's big, very, very comfortable. You could flip it all day and never notice. Especially on a Chris Reeve, if you get one with a stiffer detent or one that you haven't lubricated very well, so it's a little tough, you can get a little bit of thumb fatigue, but I don't know. Overall, and I've used this tons and tons, I find them very comfortable and easy to use. And I do like the silver just a little bit better because it's not going to wear the same way. So I have to give credit to that. One point that I feel like I should make here is this is going to be a little interesting for some of you who maybe haven't been around since titanium frame locks first started coming around. There is no stainless steel lock bar insert here. Chris Reeve, I can't remember if they carbonize or heat harden their titanium lock face, but they do harden the lock face. And of course they last forever. So there's no issue there. And I think one of the things that, this sort of challenges is the notion that we often have that, yeah, every titanium frame lock must have a stainless steel lock bar insert. Really not the case. And the 21 doesn't have it. Now on the 25 and the Inkosi, they've done something different with a ceramic ball, which is really, really cool in and of itself and a whole kind of different story. So I'm not going to get into that too much, but really neat to see a lock face that doesn't have a titanium frame lock. That doesn't have a stainless steel lock insert, but is still known to last a super long time and be extremely good and reliable. By the way, there is one benefit there, and that is the titanium and the steel are going to interface very well. So you're not going to get, Nero Knives making a video where you can do a light spine whack and unlock all his ZTs. You're not going to get that with this because it's missing that component that seems to lend itself to failure in some cases, the stainless steel lock bar insert. Not against them if they have them, but I would not argue that it's a necessity on every knife. Not at all. Okay, finally, let's talk about the handle. And this is where this knife really, really shines. So this is all built and put together to be as long lasting as possible. And we've already talked about the size of the components and the thickness of everything, the way that they do the pivot with. So the pivot is done with a bushing rather than a regular, just a pivot screw that goes straight through. So instead, it's sort of got a ledge on it, if you will, that the scales are going to tighten to. Now that means the tolerances have to be basically perfect, and they are, which is the great thing that Chris Reeve is really, really known for. Now they've dropped that on the Inkosi, but it's still a feature on the 21, which is kind of interesting. Easy to take apart, and here's where we should have this discussion. This is one really, really great feature of Sebenza's, and I wish other companies would get the memo. Okay, these are designed to be taken apart and cleaned and put back together by the end user. And that is something that is so refreshing. I have tons of knives, and I take apart a lot of my knives, especially when I'm getting ready for a review. I generally want to take the knife apart just so at least I know what's going on the inside. I don't always show you guys, but I feel like, I have been burned a couple times. I've not taken a knife apart, and I've missed something because of that. So most of the knives that I review, probably 95%, I will have taken apart. And so I really, really appreciate when a company says, hey, let's make sure this knife comes apart easily and goes back together easily. And I don't feel like that's a hard thing to achieve, but so many knife companies treat their buyers like idiots, and maybe that's their experience. Okay, there are some idiots out there, but a Chris Reeve knife is it just comes apart so easily and goes back together so easily. It's just a joy to deal with these knives from that perspective. All right, finally, let's talk about ergonomics. And this is the one area where it's only okay. I mean, this is a comfortable knife. I'm not feeling any hot spots. I'm not going to complain about, and there really isn't anything to complain about in terms of how this fits in hand. However, it's not a knife that feels like, it was just, they stuck a mold of a human grip into some plasticine and then made the knife handle. It just doesn't feel like that. Where I will say this in our comparison here, or in my commentary here, I brought up the Inkosi a couple of times, and the Inkosi is a little more comfortable. Okay, so I've got to grant the Inkosi that one as being just a little more comfortable. Now, in terms of looks and design, let me say this. I find this Doppler pattern to be a fantastic way of adding some visual interest and just some extra detail to this knife. Because what really draws me to the Sebenza and the Inkosi is just the simplicity of them. And this is fantastic because it preserves that simplicity, it preserves that minimalist look, but adds this extra degree of visual interest without taking away from the clean lines of the knife. So I really, really like this particular version of the Sebenza. Much better, by the way, than I do. There's a bunch of them out there with like pictures on the sides and stuff, and those I really, really dislike. I actively dislike pictures on the sides of Sebenzas. That makes me crazy. And the same is true of the Inkosi. I wish they would do a Doppler Inkosi, and then I would immediately just trade this for, sort of a one-for-one trade. So that's my discussion of the handle. Extremely well put together, easy to take apart. The tolerances are perfect. The fit and finish is perfect. This particular design is fantastic, and I just love the simplicity and minimalism of it. Finally, let's get to some comparisons. And I know we're 17 minutes in, but I want you guys to stick with me because this is where this gets even more interesting, okay? Now, the first knife that I'm going to bring in is my contender. Okay, if I was going to suggest a knife that could take the place of the Sebenza as the knife by which all high-end production knives should be measured, I would be submitting the Riot Knives Torrent. I love this knife. I love the blade shape. I love the overall design. I love the materials. I love the details. That really nice pivot collar with that little bit of blue, the back spacer that's polished with the little blue dots. And I mean, everything is really so well done on this that even the way they've done that really nice stonewash with the great satin flats. Okay, I'm digressing totally. However, if someone said to me, you've got to pick one of these knives to use for the rest of your life or to, take in the forest or something like that, I would take the Sebenza because it's just that touch more designed to be used and a little more long lasting. Okay, it really is. Now the price point on these is significantly different, and you are absolutely getting a great knife, but the bearings do bring into question whether or not this is, a hard use knife, despite the fact that it's sort of designed as one with fairly thick steel, big heavy stainless steel, big heavy titanium scales, flat grind. Great knife, but, and by the way, one of the nicest actions of any of the knives I own or have even tried. Okay, so yeah, great knife, no question about it. Can you justify the extra for the Sebenza? Well, I think there are a number of ways to do that, and we'll talk about value on this at the end. So let's kind of hold off on that discussion. But here is another knife that I think really throws a wrench in the works. So this is the Zero Tolerance Emerson collaboration, the 0640, and this is a very similar knife, guys. Similar blade profile, similar purpose, and despite those ugly scales, okay, if this was, just imagine these are black G10 or something, which I think would have been a much better choice than this green. Look, These are very close. Both are on washers. Both have done a fantastic job of nailing the action on washers. Super, super smooth, I've got to say. Very usable. Again, both very comfortable in hand, although maybe not perfect. 200 and I think $58 on White Mountain knives recently. I don't know if they're in stock now, but by the way, let me add again that this did come from White Mountain Knives. So yeah, boy, that's $200 less, guys, for 20 CV steel, right? What's the story? Which one would you pick? And again, now I will say the scales put me off a little bit, but even given this knife, and let's bring in one more, the 0560, which is probably my favorite zero tolerance. By the way, this one has had a lot of use, and it's a little worse for wear. By the way, it's not held up as well as I believe a Sebenza would. But great knife, you know, big heavy duty folder, great action. Couple things that they kind of missed here. The biggest thing missing on these knives is a bearing race, which would have added a great deal to the longevity of them. But again, it's on bearings. Not that that's the worst thing ever. Let's finally bring in a couple of other sort of budget overseas knives. So we've got a Bestech here, and we've got Bestech, and we've got a Kaiser. Both of these guys are making really nice titanium frame locks with great action. Kaiser, of course, is a little a little more well-known than I would submit Bestech. But both of these, S35VN, S35VN, you know, 180, I think, 170, something like maybe 190 and 180, I don't know. But they're both under $200, giving you very similar features and materials to the Chris Reeve. By the way, I think this one is, anyway, that's a different, we'll forget that for now. But again, this brings up the whole point about value that we ought to consider. And then lastly, we've got to bring in the Para-2. And I would say these two knives in the knife community are probably the two most iconic, most often compared, and most well-loved knives, right? Every reviewer, every comment, and if I ask a question about a knife, you know, I can't tell you how many times the answer to that question is going to be Paramilitary 2, and you guys will comment with that, okay? So I'd love to hear you say, which one of these would you rather have, the Para-2 or the Sebenza? So those are the comparisons, and I do think those bring up some real questions about value. Okay, by the way, the knives we looked at, the Re-out would be like $350, the Spyderco would be $140, the Bestech I think I mentioned 190, and the ZT is like $250 to $260. They've gone up, by the way. So does this knife maintain its value? Is it worth paying $450 for this? And are you getting what you think you should get for $450? All right, well, there are a number of considerations there. The first one has to be all of the different points that I've made along the way about longevity. And by the way, a lot of the points that I've made, things like the stop pin, the relief cut, the little things like that, the way they've done the pivot and the size of the pivot, right? A lot of those other expensive knives we looked at don't have those features, right? They haven't even thought about it. They don't have the ability to be sharpened for years before wearing out, and they don't have the ability to go back to Chris Reeve for a spot treatment anytime you want. Okay, so there's a lot to consider there, and I think, and that doesn't quite get to the point yet that I haven't made, which is the way in which these are made, which is in the USA by skilled craftsmen putting these things together. Go and watch the Chris Reeve shop tour that I think Blade HQ did. I'm pretty sure, I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure it's Blade HQ. Go and watch it and you'll see that, you know, these things are assembled, hand assembled by real people, not just a bunch of machines pounding things into slots and robotic arms coming in and putting screws in and pumping these things out by the thousands, right? They don't have that. It's a different process, which does cost more for sure, all right? Now, the other thing that you have to remember is that the price of a knife is made up of a number of different variables, okay? So you've got to think price is partially about profit, it's partially about marketing, it's partially about what the market will bear. It's, you know, there's a lot of things that go into that. And I have a video where I discuss all those things to try to make the point that, you know, makers and people who are building and making knives, they're considering a whole number of things when they decide how much they ought to price their knife at. Okay, so just kind of keep that in mind as well. All right, now maybe for you, hey, 450 bucks is nothing you will ever spend on a knife. Or maybe you're watching this and you love this knife and you think it's the most fantastic thing ever, but you just can't imagine how you would get your hands on that kind of money for a knife. Well, let me say, number one, you could, if you put aside 50 bucks a month, right, you've got that money saved up in no time. Number two, if you're the kind of guy who's got 20 Spydercos, right, sell 5 of them and there's your Chris Reeve. All right, so that may be a consideration as well. Are they expensive? Yes, there's no question that this is an expensive knife, and I wouldn't try to say that it isn't, and nor would I try to say that, you know, everybody should go out and buy a $450 folding knife. For many people, a $30 or $40 or $50 folding knife is going to be fantastic and do everything you need your knife to do. You may, you know, maybe you'll have to replace it a little more often, or you may have to deal with some fit and finish issues or some steel that's not quite up to par. But the fact is, for most people, those numbers are going to be, you know, a Rat 1 is going to do everything you would ever need. All right. So in conclusion, do I like the Sebenza 21? Yes, I absolutely do, very much, especially this particular version with the Doppler pattern. I love this particular Sebenza 21. I really do. All right. Do you have to own one to be considered a legitimate knife guy? Absolutely not. You could own nothing but $30 folders and be the greatest knife guy that has ever walked among knife guys. Okay. Is this a well-built, long-lasting precision cutting tool? Absolutely. And it's beautiful to boot. Okay, so yeah, that's what I would say about this. It's not for everyone. It totally isn't. But is it fantastic? Is it beautiful? Is it exciting? Can I really geek out over this knife? Yes, absolutely, I can. And if you emailed me today and said, hey, I'm buying one, I'd say congratulations. I wouldn't say for a second, you know, you're better off spending your money somewhere else. I wouldn't. All right, there you go, guys. That's my conclusion. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check the links in the description box and use them. It does help the channel. We'll talk to you soon.